Welcome to episode 249, the 3 conversations your mind is having in any hard conversation. Welcome to the Be That 1% podcast. I'm your host, James Silvis, mindset specialist and performance coach. And here on the show, I'm going to challenge you to think deeper, commit to greatness, and develop a stronger mindset. You'll hear stories from those who are living life on their terms, and you'll receive strategies that will help you level up. So the question is, are you ready to be your own 1%? Let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. I am super grateful that you are here. If this is your first time to the show, welcome. And if you are a return listener, welcome home. Today, I'm experiencing a lot of gratitude for this podcast and just for a lot of recent milestones that I've been able to hit in my career and in my life. And I'm very blessed and grateful to have a platform like this that has reached, now over 130 countries to come on here and share insights that have helped me navigate challenges, uncertainty, pain, pleasure, and create the life that I've been able to create and what's worked for me in an attempt to help you, have a more richer life experience. Being that 1% is not just being the top 1%. It's being your own 1%, because you're one of one, right? Like there's power in that. There's uniqueness in that. I don't think a lot of us remember that there's only one version of us. And so everything that I talk about on the podcast is an attempt to honor that, to help you be more you, And so as I've been reflecting over these milestones in my life, and in the process of writing a book, which has been super challenging, I've been focusing on communication a lot recently. I've also been a part of an app called Felt, previously known as Mind. And on that app, I've created a series all around conversations, having hard conversations. What do you do? How do you prep? How do you handle conversations like that? What to look out for when it goes off track? What do you do? What's helpful from a framework perspective to help me navigate this very tense conversation that I'm avoiding? Why is all that happening, right? That's kind of what I aim to tackle in that series that I led there. And it was really helpful for me to have to put that together. And the feedback that I got was very positive. And so I was like, maybe I should share this on the podcast, a little bit of it, in an attempt to help serve you and in your next hard conversation. So thank you for being here. That's the purpose of the next couple episodes, is going to be like a mini course on hard conversations. I want to reference a framework that I learned from a book called Difficult Conversations. I think it was released in the early 2000s, and it's all about how to discuss what matters most. And the authors, Douglas Stone, Bruce Patton, and Sheila Heen, are of the Harvard Negotiation Project. And they've worked with so many business leaders and individuals over the years on, how do you really structure and formulate and talk about hard things, and it's essential that we learn that as human beings. I think one of our main responsibilities, this is a core belief of mine, is that we need to learn how to communicate. And if we don't, our life is going to be very miserable, because one, we're not going to be able to articulate what we're experiencing and what we need. And two, we're not going to be able to understand or truly hear what other people are saying, which is always going to lead to some form of disconnection. And we already have enough of that going on in the world right now. And if we could, improve those skills day after day, we're only going to have better quality relationships. And out of every study that's ever been done on happiness, right, relationships are the number one factor that influence how rich our life can be. And so if our communication strengthens, our relationships strengthen. It's a beautiful thing. So today I'm going to talk about how what this framework is and what I've learned and how it's helped me. And then we'll talk about some like what to do's afterwards, like some take home homework kind of stuff to help you be better at navigating these. All right. So in this book, these authors outline 3 conversations that we're having in any conversation, right? This is the mental chatter that we have while we're having a hard conversation. And I also will say that communication is like a dance. We need 2 parties, okay? And there's no silver bullet. There's no like step 1, step 2, step 3. You're jumping into uncertainty in any conversation that you're going in. It could go anywhere, right? We can anticipate, we can prepare, but at the end of the day, we don't want to be married to having it go a certain way because it never does. And much like a dance, you want to know the steps, you want to know how to move, and then when you connect with the other person, who's leading, what step is next, how are both parties on board, right? There's a lot of factors that go in, but once that connection is made, then flow can start happening. And that's what leads to you dancing with the music. In this case, dancing with life in a conversation like one that you could be having in the future. So these 3 conversations that were happening, the first one is about what happened. What happened? And here, the main thing that you're trying to understand, your mind, this chatter, is who's right, who's wrong, who meant what was their intention, and who's to blame. That's what we're asking ourselves in that conversation. The second conversation we're having is the most active, and that is what I'm feeling. Are my feelings valid, appropriate? Should I acknowledge them? Should I deny them? Right? Almost the heart of every single hard conversation is feelings. And we'll get in that in a second. And the third conversation is around identity. It's the conversation that we're having with ourselves and what the situation means to us, right? How does what happened affect my esteem, my image, my sense of who I am in this world? And there's 3 kind of core identity questions that they outline in the book that are helpful to think about. It's, am I competent? Is what happened affecting how I perceive my competence and how other people perceive my competence? Am I a good person? Is what happened influencing how others see me and potentially seeing me as a bad person? Or am I worthy of love? Because I did this, does that mean my love from this person or even from myself is in jeopardy? And depending on how we answer those questions will dictate what version of us shows up to the space, right? So let's double click on each of these and find out some strategies that we can do to mitigate this conversation or at least navigate it more effectively. So again, what happened? That's the first thing. Someone does something at work and now you're sitting face to face with them. And let's say you're a leader giving this feedback to an employee, or you're the one receiving the feedback from your boss, or someone in your relationship, your wife, your husband does something that you don't like or that isn't healthy for the relationship and you want to talk about it, right? What happened? What's the truth? What are their intentions? Who's to blame? This part of the conversation is rarely about what happened, like the facts of what happened, and it's more so about the conflicting perceptions, what they see about what happened, right? The values that they're associating to what happened. That's the goal. The goal is to understand that, because the conversation's very rarely about what's true as it is about what's important. What's important to them could not be true, but it's still important. And until that's recognized, the person will not open up, right? And when we make the goal understanding, being curious about their perceptions, about their values, about their interpretations and intentions, we move from giving ultimatums or delivering, in their words, messages, and we snap into more of asking questions. So we approach the conversation with the questions that prompt answers, that add more context, that help us gather more data to help us understand what's actually at play from their point of view. And that also helps us understand maybe where we may have misinterpreted also, because that's highly likely. Common pitfalls within this what happened conversation is that we think most times, if not all the time, that they're the problem. It's all their fault, right? And the interesting thing is that people don't often change until they feel understood. And if we don't help them feel understood, or we don't do our job in really asking questions, listening to really feel where they're at, then we're missing an opportunity to take that relationship deeper. We need to understand the person's story well enough to see how their conclusions make sense within it, within the context, within the situation. And that requires us to shift from certainty of I know what's happening here to curiosity of this is my interpretation of what's happening here. I want to see what their interpretation is. Because until we know both of those things, it's a one-sided conversation. You're going to be speaking in one language. They're going to be speaking in another language. Both of you are going to assume that each other is understood, and then nothing changes, right? The second pitfall is that most people assume that the intent of the people's actions are negative, that they did it on purpose, maliciously, to hurt the individual. And that causes the person who's associating that meaning to come in defensive, to come in attack mode, to come in like, hey, I know you did this on purpose, and here's why that's wrong. And here's why you're not going to do that again. And it's very aggressive, and it automatically puts the other side at defense, right? And, there may be times where that can be the case. I find that most conversations, though, that is not a useful strategy. And so something that we can do here is just assume positive intent, that they didn't have all the information, that they didn't have all the data. And when we do that, we come into the conversation more open. And when we are more open, there's a higher chance that the other person is going to be more open, right? Another pitfall is the blame portion, right? Who's to blame? Most conversations focus a lot on who is to blame, and the fact that we're talking about blame, it produces disagreement, because you're going to want to blame them, they're going to want to blame you, and it's just a constant like battle between who's right. And that evokes fear and punishment, and nobody wants to be blamed. And most times, both people are at fault. It's very rarely one person's sole fault that had happened, right? And so a way to combat that is one, to own your role in the situation. And that might mean that you haven't brought this conversation up until now, and you should have. It might be that you didn't lay out the expectations properly. It might be that you didn't say anything when it happened the first time. But identifying your role in it invites responsibility on the other side, and it's less attack and it's more collaboration. And that's what produces people being on the same page more often. So just a note concluding this what happened conversation is, just because you believe something doesn't make it true. And oftentimes people want to talk about more what's important than what is true, right? So until we understand the other side, it's going to be very difficult to move forward. Ways that other person can know if we're understanding them is to repeat back. Okay, so here's what I'm hearing. Is this right? So it sounds like this, and this. Is that what you're saying? Some version of repackaging what they're saying to you back to them to ensure that there is an alignment there. Then you can share your side, or you both go back and forth, but really understanding their side is going to be helpful. And you might say, well, why is that my job? Well, because someone's got to do it. And since you're listening to this podcast, my guess is that you're more of the leader in your interactions, and leaders go first. And without an in-person kind of example here, that's the best that we have in this format. So the second conversation that we're having is one of feelings. What am I feeling about what happened? Right. And so many people that I hear with people that I've worked with and just in general are afraid to bring emotions and feelings into conversations. They say, I got to be logical about this. And there is some truth to that. And if we don't talk about the feelings and emotions, and there's no way for us to one, feel understood, and also practice articulating what is happening. So we have all these harbored feelings that can blow up at any time. And emotional intelligence is about being able to identify and communicate effectively what is happening and what meaning is being associated to the things that are going on. And this is one of the greatest challenges that we face. And I get why people don't want to bring this into a conversation, because it's messy and people don't do a lot of work on themselves. So they don't even know how to articulate what it is that they're feeling or what they're experiencing. Or even if they do, they're nervous because the other person might view that as weakness or take advantage of that, or you name it. But if you're really wanting clear, deep, meaningful conversations, this is just a requirement. This is the courage that you're going to have, the vulnerability to lay it out there. Because at the end of the day, if we don't, then we're not making the soil fertile enough to grow plants. And I don't know about you, but for me, I want to have deep, meaningful conversations where we can talk a lot about meaning, like deep, hard things. And that by nature requires courage, right? And if we don't talk about these feelings, then that can color the conversation and prevent breakthroughs from happening. It could affect how our posture is in a conversation, what our tonality is. We may be speaking with more sass or resentment in our voice because we're not vocalizing that resentment. Not managing our emotions or talking about them keeps the spotlight on us as opposed to on them. Working through our emotions before that conversation and also during brings the other person in on the experience. It's again bringing in the collaborative effort to move towards a solution that benefits both parties. But if we're not talking about what we're feeling or the stories that we're creating that are causing what we're feeling, then people don't understand how we got to where we are. And that's really, really important, right? Your feelings are just as important as theirs, and their feelings are just as important as yours. No one is more important than the other. Both need to be expressed to move forward. Otherwise, someone will partially feel heard and they'll still hold on to that piece that wasn't identified or talked about. And that can affect the momentum that has come from the clarity that was discovered on the call or in the conversation. And if we don't talk about our feelings also, those can manifest into judgment about the other person. Oh, they're so self-absorbed. They're so thoughtless, right? This is a judgment that comes from a story we're creating around a feeling that we're having based on what we perceive happened in the situation. Our vocalization of that forces us to challenge it in real time and invite new information from the other person that can change how we feel about what happened, helping us work through that challenge and come through on the other side more resilient, more aware, and more effective. Judgments feel like feelings when we say them. They are motivated by anger or frustration or hurt, and the person on the receiving end understands very clearly what we are feeling when we vocalize them. So we want to become emotionally intelligent, not emotionally avoidant, right? The other thing that we can do is we can characterize. So we can look at someone's one-time behavior and just blanket statement their identity. Oh, they're a bad person because they do this type of thing, right? And that can be very challenging, because if you believe that, then there's no hope for change for the individual and or for the relationship. And if they did that to you, you'd probably feel the same way. And so we want to talk about what happened while also keeping the focus on the behavior, not necessarily the identity or the person, if you will. All right. The third conversation is the identity conversation. This is where we're asking the questions: am I competent? Am I a good person? Am I worthy of love? Based on what happened and what I think the perception is that people have of me and my own perception of myself. And this is, again, comes back to the stories that we're creating that are helpful to talk about when we're in these types of situations. The more we take the situation at hand personally and what we hear from the other party personally, and we assign that meeting as a degrades us, then we're going to feel really unbalanced in that conversation. And the more unbalanced we are, the more defensive we can be, the more we shut down, the more we deflect, the more we name call, the more we stonewall, all these natural kind of self-preservation techniques that we can do come out in that time. So this conversation really comes down to how we see ourselves. And if we have a very shallow or weak sense of self, because we haven't done the work, or we haven't or we rely so much on validation and what other people say, we're going to crumble in these types of moments, and we're going to assume that every constructive piece of feedback that's given to us is an attack on our character, and we're only going to see that constructive feedback, not also the other wins that we've had in the past. And this kind of goes into this black or white thinking, where when in the thick of something challenging, you're only focusing on what's going wrong. And by focusing on what's going wrong, you associate you with being wrong. There's something wrong with you. You're a bad person. You're not capable. And that's just one situation, but it's the only situation that you see. And that one situation permeates all of time. So it's like you're only living in that moment for eternity, while in that moment, you're not remembering all the great things that you've done, all the breakthroughs that you've had, all the kind acts that you've done. And so your identity becomes very fixated on that one thing. This could also be on the positive side, where you get a positive piece of information and that kind of deletes everything else. And you have like this euphoric high, like, oh yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing really good. But that you take that to the extreme as well. And so now anytime there's conflicting evidence that goes against that image that you're only holding in that moment, you're not open to that feedback, because being open to that feedback takes you from the top of the mountain down to, let's say, midway down the mountain. And who wants that? And so you can be closed off. You cannot accept certain things when other people say them. You'll be selective with the feedback that you get, only pruning for the goods and not the quote unquote bads that make you better. Right? So this is black or white thinking. We have to be mindful when we're snapping into this, because it distorts reality. It's not a true, it doesn't support a holistic view of ourselves. The truth is that we've done some really great things and we've also made some really bad mistakes, right? Though both of those exist. And being mindful of that keeps us in a very humble, confident, let's say, to some degree, state of mind that is a very effective place to be, because you're not too high and you're not too low, which allows you to maintain momentum and keep consistency, which is key to growing in anything, right? And so we have to check ourselves when we're giving too much meaning to one thing, and being blinded to other factors. So being aware, of when our mind goes there, not over identifying, not using like always or never, right? Because very rarely are there always things and never things. We're just taking one thing and again blanketing that over all of reality across all of time. So we want to be mindful of that and adopt and like you could still be a great person and make a mistake. You could still be great at your work and do a bad job. And so having that awareness helps you remain open to the necessary thing that you need to hear in order to grow. And the other person needs that too. So the more you understand this, the more you can hold space for it and also teach it. Another helpful thing here, the outline in the book, is admitting and accepting these three things: your mistakes, your mixed intentions, and your own contributions to the problem. Those three things are very, very helpful in bringing your humility to a place where it's not solely about you and it's not solely about the other person. It's about both of you. Keeps a very healthy balance. And lastly, to kind of wrap this up, is ways that we can regain our balance in any conversation. These are the things that they suggested within those three conversations that we're having: what happened, feelings, and identity. One is to let go of trying to control their reaction. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. Most of us can operate in people pleasing. We don't want to make people cry or feel like they're the worst person in the world, right? That's hardly ever our intention. So we have to get rid of, we have to release the control, the attempt to control their reaction, because we could say it in the most perfect, beautiful way, and they could still take it personally, and most likely will. At least they will, for the first however part of that conversation, maybe even the whole time. And so we have to understand that that's not in our control, and not spend energy believing that we can. Just to do our best to explain our intentions, to, you know, operate in the best way that we know how, and then, but still do it. Prepare for their responses in advance, right? If based on what I know about this person, that could be right or wrong, they could ask these types of questions. They could react this way. And if they do, what would I do in that situation? Also known as role playing. You could role play with some of the leaders that you're around, coach that you have, a therapist, even just a journaling exercise, like working through that. That can help you bring more confidence into a conversation and feel more grounded. You know, even if those things never come up, the fact that you're preparing for it signals your commitment to the conversation. Number 3 is take a break and then come back. You know, sometimes these conversations get heated, and that's normal. And we need to take a moment so that we don't do anything out of character. 1, we got to vocalize that. And 2, we got to have a time frame that we want to come back to. This is not a get out of jail card here. Like, you just don't use that to get out of it. You need a moment. I respect that. When can we reconvene this conversation? You might say 15 minutes or tonight, or, you know, try to choose something in a reasonable time, because the other person is also committing to you and their time and their resources as well. So being mindful of that. And then also the last thing is find the courage to ask for help from the other person, from someone that you don't know, in an attempt to have this conversation. Vulnerability, key to growth. If you don't ask, you don't get. And we all have blind spots. We all have skills that we can upgrade. We all have challenges that we're facing. And just because we've made it through a few of them to what we think on our own doesn't mean that we should. You know, all the greats have teams. They have people that support them and help them and refuel them. And that's a really good thing to have. So build that. And the only way to build that is to ask. And by asking, you grow, you get better. So I hope this framework was helpful. And I know it's served me so well in personal and professional conversations, but just having this in my mind of like, okay, I'm in my feelings conversation right now. I gotta really understand that, vocalize that. Or, I'm taking this personally. I'm associating what they're saying as they look at me as less competent, and I'm getting defensive. Okay, let me take a breath. Let me vocalize that to some degree, however I feel I need to say it. And through the vocalization, I create another level of accountability for me, and I increase the awareness in the other individual. So utilize this, practice this. Let me know your thoughts on this. If this was helpful to you, share this with whoever you think needs to hear it. Help me get the word out there to more people, and share these insights that can help enrich all of our lives. We all need this to some degree. And my job is to just share what's working and what I'm learning. And I hope you could do the same and help me get the word out. So if you haven't also gone to iTunes and left a review, I ask that you please do that. And let me know your thoughts. All right. Much love, everybody. Talk to you soon. Go out there, be your own 1%. And I'll see you on the next episode.